What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the PFN Scouting Podcast. We were off last week. Derek was on vacation, but to all of our pleasure, Derek is back, and we are back talking about football today. I'm Ian Cummings. Derek is my co-host here. And Derek, tight ends. We've gone through all the different position groups. We talked about offense, defense, quarterbacks, receivers, running backs, offensive line, just corners, safeties, the whole deal. And now we are circling back to that one position. We didn't mean to not cover it. It wasn't like a slight to a tight end or anything. It was just, you only have so much time to cover different positions each week. This is the one that we're coming to last. And for our good friend Ali at PFN CFN, sorry, Ali, we will not get to special teamers, kickers, punters, long snappers just yet. That'll be down the road potentially. But tight ends today, it's a fun one, so we'll get into it. A lot of varying molds, and especially after last year's class with Brock Bowers, a lot of excitement on tap with that. But first off, Derek, I got to ask about your overall well-being. How are you after your week off?
Oh, I'm feeling juiced up. Second energy drink of the morning, I think, yes, and that's a little bit dangerous, but it's a little aggressive. But I'm feeling a lot better, and part of the reason we didn't get to tight ends when we were talking about the skill position players of the 2025 class is because I tend to ramble a little bit, and that's probably going to happen today after having 2 energy drinks, but I'm good to go, man. Thanks for having me back on. Let's do this.
Rambling is an affliction that I can relate to because we'll be going through these, right? And it's like you talk about your observations on film, and it's like, oh, all of a sudden 5 minutes are gone. Where did those 5 minutes go? Right? So, we have a rough outline of what we want to talk about, but it never quite goes according to plan. So you got to be able to stick and move, but it's fun for sure. What's your energy drink regimen like, by the way? I just got to ask because I remember maybe it was a couple summers ago, but Dan Campbell was asked about his coffee order or whatever, and it was like 2 shots espresso. I think it added up to like 900 milligrams of caffeine in the morning, and then maybe he had another one later. You don't go quite that high, do you? I think 400 is the cutoff.
Yeah, I mean that's a bit much, but I've kind of fallen for the Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson Zoa energy drinks. Okay. A bunch of different flavors. I mean, we are not paid for this promotion, but it is not brought to you by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson either. So, and I will spare everybody my Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson promos from back in his WWE days, and but his 2000 version is the GOAT in my opinion. But so his energy drink, it works. Clearly I'm talking too much, but that's my regimen. One of those in the morning normally gets my head right.
Nice. Yeah, I go with a V8, like 80 milligrams, I think, but it does the trick. And you mix it up a little bit for sure. I had never drinking coffee very much, but when I do need it, it helps out. So today we definitely need it because tight ends, a very deep position group, a lot of different player molds, and it's going to be a fun class. Last year we had Brock Bowers, who was one of the highest rated, probably the highest rated one since Kyle Pitts, and in my sample size anyway, one of the highest that I've ever graded. So very fun prospect. We don't quite have a Bowers level prospect in this class, or do we? I guess we'll find out. We're going to go through our top 5. You want to start at 5 or you want to start at 1? You want to go up to down or down to up?
Oh, let's start at 5. Okay. Who do you got at number 5 out of curiosity?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm still grading guys. So there are a few who may leap into that position. A few guys that I haven't graded that could enter the running. Ben Urosek, who was at Stanford, transferred to Georgia. Love his rack ability. Love his body control. I think he's an explosive athlete. A little bit lighter, but I think he's added some mass. He could definitely challenge for that tight end 5 spot. I haven't graded him yet, but I'm well aware of the tools that he possesses. Jack Velling, transferred from Oregon State to Michigan State, right? So I live near East Lansing, so pretty close to home, but I like the skill set that he has to offer. I want to get a feel for his blocking ability, but we know from his I think 8 touchdown season last year that he can make plays in the red zone. He can separate. He's a pretty fluid mover for his size. So another one that I haven't graded, but very interested to see. Bryson Nesbit, I have not graded yet from North Carolina, but another one who's kind of a seam threat, right? You can definitely tell explosive mover, really streamlined athlete, and he can make plays at the catch point too. Just my questions again with the blocking ability for a guy who's around 6'5", 230. That light frame can sometimes translate to that. So a few guys that I haven't graded yet. So the order is still pending change at tight end, but my top 5 as it stands right now, my 5th tight end is Mitchell Evans from Notre Dame. Is that? Let me check real quick because I got so many names floating around in my head. Okay, it is Evans. For 1 second, I was like having a brain fart. I was like, is it Evans? I don't even know. It is Mitchell Evans. Okay, good. But he's my tight end 5, and he is one of those really rock solid players, I think. He's going to be a solid pro. I don't see the athleticism that I saw with Michael Mayer, who came before him, right? I think he's a little bit more lumbering as a mover in those short areas. The stride frequency is not quite as high. But, for a guy who's not overly explosive or fast, I was really impressed by how nuanced and fluid he is as a separator. I do think he has the hinge flexibility, the angle freedom to, divert quickly on those quick outs and dig routes, right? I think he can work up the seam, and he's really good at boxing guys out at the catch point. Really strong hands at the point of attack. Some of the strongest hands in the class over the middle of the field, in my opinion. This is a guy who you can get him those clutch down opportunities. He can get a little bit of rack, because he's physical. He doesn't have elite contact balance or rack ability, but again, I think a really strong utility tight end who's a great blocker as well. Not quite an elite blocker yet. I think there's some issues with leverage maintenance and pad level management that he can improve upon. Sometimes a little uncontrolled when he's getting out in space. Drifts a little too tall, which is a natural problem to have, right? When you're 6'5", 260, right? But he's a big dude. He's physical. He's got the grit. He's got the energy. And he's just a solid player. I think the upside is capped, but this is the exact type of tight end that I want to be a tight end 2 in the NFL. So Mitchell Evans, my tight end 5. Who you got at that spot?
So Bryson Nesbit is my tight end 5, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring up some of the guys that were kind of in that fringe that I could probably make a case for. Ben Urosek, you already mentioned. I'm very interested to see what his role looks like in Georgia after I thought some very encouraging signs during his time at Stanford. Luke Lachey is another guy that just outside of my top 5. You mentioned kind of lumbering and maybe lacks the explosiveness. That's something that I kind of see with Lachey, although I don't want to bet against Iowa tight ends because they have a fantastic track record. And the receiving production is, again, requires a little bit of context because of that Iowa offense. But I don't see him having a very high ceiling as a pass catcher in the NFL. But certainly some of those inline duties in a similar ilk to Mitchell Evans certainly makes me feel like he's going to be a quality contributor in the NFL in certain packages. Jake Brenningstool from Clemson is one that I'm very intrigued with, but again, another guy that is like just a big receiver in a lot of ways. He's really, really light. His play strength, I have concerns about him even being able to, create separation if he gets roughed up or defenders get their hands on him at the top of his stem. So, because I've seen him get a little bit rerouted and knocked off his course, in the midst of his route. But there is a lot of movement, fluidity, and capabilities, and just excellent hand-eye coordination, ball skills, body control. I could see the case for him being in this top 5. And Brant Keithy from Utah.
That's one of Ollie's guys right there. He'll be happy to hear that you mentioned him. He's been one of his guys for a while. Really good utility, kind of Swiss Army knife, if I remember correctly.
Right. I mean, they split him out wide. He is a wide receiver. To me, his skill set, even his twitchiness, and like you mentioned, the fluidity, the hip sync, the route deception, the stem IQ, and even rack ability, all kind of feel like a receiver, but he's very, again, kind of sub 240. And I just kind of wonder, what is he going to be able to hold up in any sort of inline situation, or is he going to be an H-back / move tight end, whether he operates as a big slot option or occasionally operating outside if they like the matchup. He offers something in the passing game. Absolutely, amongst the top 5 as far as pass catching prospects at the tight end position, but still very undersized. That makes me hesitant to aggressively rank him inside the top 5. But I say all that to say this. Bryson Nesbit has some of those same concerns, but I love I'm interested to see what his arm length looks like, because even though he's at 6'5", he looks like he's got like a 6'7" wingspan. And I love his fluid movement capabilities. I do see some stem IQ. You're asking him to run a seam route. He's not just running in a straight line. He's trying to widen out defenders, and carve out a little bit of extra space for Drake May last season. We'll see what the quarterback play looks like in North Carolina under center this upcoming season. But a lot of things as far as those pass catching skill sets and body control, I really enjoy and think that Nesbit, of that collection of players that I have questions about transitioning as an inline contributor. Nesbit, though, certainly has the skill set that really intrigues me as a move tight end in the NFL.
Yeah. So is he your tight end 5? I don't remember.
He's my tight end 5. I have very long-winded answer, again, rambling, and energy drinks contributed to this take.
Hey, I love it though. I love it. Yeah, it's a unique conversation to have with the modern tight end. Are you looking for that seam pass game weapon, like you said? The guy who can generate mismatches in the passing game, or you're looking for that 3-down tight end who can also provide value on early downs as a blocker, right? There's appeal to both skill sets, but one is more inherently limited than the other. I think that, if you're not a 3-down tight end, that does constrict how you can be utilized, right? Because you need to be able to deceive defenses on early downs too, if you want to go play action, right? So, I think having a guy who is able to be a blocker, not just a blocker, but a versatile one. If he can play inline, H-back, off motions, if he can execute different types of blocks, that's going to help him even more. And so it's really tricky because you want to fall in love with these guys who are 225, 230, 235, right? But that skill set is naturally a little bit limited, right? In some situations. So it's a unique conversation to have. And I think that segues really nicely into my tight end 4. Oronde Gadsden II from Syracuse. And I will preface with this. He would probably grade higher for me as a wide receiver. I think I would personally utilize him as a wide receiver. And, the terminology overlaps, right? Big slot, tight end, right? Mismatch weapon. There's some overlap for sure in the modern NFL as to what these skill sets are. I would more often use him as a wide receiver. He can play out wide. He can play in the slot. He can play off motion. Doesn't have a lot of inline blocking experience. And last year, he missed most of the season with a Lisfranc fracture in his foot. So, he had surgery to put screws in, and then he missed spring football this past spring to take the screws out. But, ideally, hopefully, it's smooth sailing from here on out. He'll be back to 100% and he can play this year. But for me, Oronde Gadsden II, man, and I've seen posts. Apparently, he's a cheat code in college football 2025. Apparently, because he's 6'5", 224. 225, somewhere around there. And this dude is an athlete. He is a very, very good, especially in short ranges. I think he's very fluid for his size, and he's explosive. He's got great vertical speed for a tight end too. He might run near the 4.5 range. The energized accelerator too. Some guys are lumbering. They're a little slower with their strides. Oronde Gadsden II for me is one of those guys who just really moves easily, nimble, effortless, all of those terms apply with him. And that bend and fluidity translates as a route runner. He's shown that he can stem guys. He can offset with that lateral agility. He can separate independently. And he has some of the best body control and instincts and composure in contested situations that I've seen in this class. One of the most natural receivers that I've seen. And he can make it all happen. And then as a rack player too, he's got some fluidity and some craftiness as well. So he's a unique player in that he started out his career at Syracuse more primarily as a wide receiver. They switched his positional designation to tight end ahead of the 2023 season, and then he got knocked out for most of the year with that injury. So we never really got to see him play that tight end role. So still barely any inline experience at all. So the caveat here is that, down the stretch, I tend to grade players if there are players that kind of, overlap across positional designations. I will list them at the position that I project them to play. So we could look back in 2 to 3 months, and I've got him listed as a wide receiver because the more I think about it, he's going to grade higher for me at that position because one, the blocking utility is very, very unproven, very unproven. He's a physical active blocker on the boundary, but I need to know if he can block inline. I need to know if he can seal out a guy in the A gap or the C gap. Sorry. I was getting that kind of,
put him at guard.
Inverse. Yeah, put him at guard, right? At center. There we go. I was inverting it in my head. That's my bad. But I need to know if he can do those more grueling tasks, farther inside. And if he can't do that, that generally constricts what he can do as a blocker. But I do think the upside is massive as a receiving threat. So Oronde Gadsden II, my tight end 4, very bullish on the receiving tools. I think he can be a mismatch generator with some of the best of them.
So I haven't gotten to Oronde Gadsden quite yet. So I've seen a little bit of him, but nothing to have like a concrete opinion. Now, if you're kind of mentioning that he kind of fits into that mold, and he just may be the best of that, like you said, of that skill set. If you want to move tight end, that may be the guy who's the best suited to give NFL defenses issues as a move weapon in the passing game. But yeah, certainly the inline blocking stuff. I mean, it's interesting because a lot of these tight ends are fully capable of stock blocking, opposing nickelbacks or safeties out on the perimeter. But you're asking, again, the assignments change drastically at the NFL level. So I'm interested to see Oronde Gadsden. I haven't played with him in college football 2025 yet.
I've heard he's a mismatch. My roommate was watching a video yesterday. Someone was playing in Syracuse and he had like 155 yards and 2 touchdowns in the second quarter, just because this guy, and it does translate to real life. Not quite to that, that severity, that level of severity, but you do see the athleticism. He can separate like a wide receiver and he can box guys out. He can outreach defenders. He is such a tough assignment for any kind of defender. So it's a fun discussion because you mentioned it as well. Like, yeah, he can stock block on corners and safeties out in space on the perimeter, on the boundary, and he can get to the second level and sustain those blocks too. But the modern NFL is trending more toward the ground game again, right? And it's not that it trends toward or away from it, right? It goes in cycles naturally. It goes in cycles on the broad scale. It goes in cycles from week to week. So the NFL is always fluctuating. So you need, my stance is you need to be able to do as much as you can. You need to be able to do as much as you can. And if a guy can't line up in line and help chip a defender or go one-on-one and at least delay a defender's advance upfield, that can be a problem for his usage palette. So it's something to watch, but I do think right now he's my highest graded within that mold, and I think it could stay that way. If I grade, I still got to grade Nesbit and a few others, but to me Gadsden has one of the most appealing receiving skill sets that I've seen.
Very nice. Yeah. So at my tight end 4, we don't have to really touch on him because I'm pretty much in lockstep with you with regards to Mitchell Evans. I think he's going to be a solid pro. Like you said, with mentioning the inline blocking abilities, I think that is something that NFL teams are going to value because, like you said, you've seen the movement towards lighter, speed-oriented players out on the edge. If you can punish that by running right at those defensive looks, some of those sub packages where you're bringing in, 3 safeties or 5 defensive backs to kind of try to combat the speed from the offensive end, you can try to punish it if you have an inline tight end who is capable of, abusing an edge rusher who's a bit undersized. Mm-hmm. So, Mitchell Evans is someone that I think can definitely contribute in that factor. That's why I got him at tight end 4.
Yeah. It's and there's a role for those guys too. Obviously we'd love to, if every team could have a Brock Bowers type of just X factor, right? But the tight end too, I think, if you can have that kind of tight end too, who is so solid across the board, unspectacular, yes, but he can block in line. He can provide that level of versatility for you. He can take some reps out of the slot against bigger defenders, and he can at least run routes. And even if a guy's inside his frame, he's not very phased by that. Like, he can make tough catches as well. So, a guy who, again, you're not going to rely on to be a target funnel or whatever, but his presence is valuable because of that two-phase versatility they provide. So I like Evans a lot. I think if I were picking, late day 2, early day 3 would be my range for him personally. I think you get him in that range, kind of like where Kate Stover went to the Texans this past draft. Just a really solid, dependable player. Unspectacular, but he'll have a role and he'll do it well. So a fun player. Who do you have at tight end 3? I'll let you lead off with this one. We're getting into the podium finish now. Gold, silver, bronze. Who's your bronze medal tight end preliminary viewing?
Bronze right now is Oscar Delp.
Ooh, okay. I like that.
From Georgia. They're a lot of movement skills. You talk about that inline capabilities. What allowed Georgia the versatility to be able to run a bunch of 12 personnel with using Brock Bowers as kind of that, movement weapon across the entire offensive formation was because Oscar Delp looked at least sufficient in many regards as an inline tight end. But I do think that he brings some of that skill set to be able to move him around the formation. I really like his rack ability, his movement ability. There was also, between the ears, his knack for being able to settle down in open zones and there was some STEM IQ that I also saw with his route running and his ability to get off the line of scrimmage and operate through physical bump and run coverage that actually kind of intrigued me a little bit. So I know that it was all about Brock Bowers last year, and it should have been, but I think this Oscar Delp kid can play. It's just going to be very interesting to see the dynamic between him and Eurosec in this offense in 2024.
Yeah, because Eurosec is a guy who, you know, you go back to Stanford. Like, this is a guy who can be utilized in that similar way where, you know, obviously not the type of the caliber of player that Bowers is. Very few are. But a guy who can be used off motions, who can go in the slot, you know, who you can isolate rack opportunities for him. He can make plays on the ball. So kind of that weapon mold where you can do a bunch of different things with him. And Delp gives you the flexibility to do that. I haven't put assistant grade on Oscar Delp either, so I'm really glad you brought him up because I still need to get the valuation on him. But from what I've seen, right, you know, one of the bigger knocks for Brock Bowers, right, was that he couldn't play that inline role. That he was a guy that you would probably want on the boundary more often or out of the H-back role if you're using him as a blocker. He's a great weapon in the pass game and he's a high effort blocker for sure. But just at 6'4", 240, 245, doesn't quite have the elite play strength to hold up there consistently. Oscar Delp might have a little more of that. So it's going to be fun to see how he can file in. And yeah, you mentioned it, that tandem, that duo, you know, there's a lot of fun things that you can do with that. So, and they got Carson Beck throwing them the football. So it's a win-win. It doesn't hurt. It does not hurt at all. Our preliminary QB1 here. I think your QB2, right? So, you know, he's right in that 1-2 range, the podium, one of the better passers in the class. So fun group as well. Fun group for sure. My tight end 3 right now is Luke Lachey from Iowa. I think I definitely, the things that you said earlier, I agree with 100%. I think, or not 95%. I would give a little more. I would give a little more credit to the linear explosiveness. I don't think he's a great lateral mover. I think he is going to be more of that linear seam threat, right? But I do think he is explosive on the vertical plane. I think, you know, you see him get out and expand his strides. He can chew up space. I think he can get up the seam. He's 6'6", over 250. So I think he's around 250. He might be close to 247 right now, but you know, close to that range. He can box guys out again. You know, he's another player who can make really high difficulty adjustments at the catch point at a moment's notice, very quick. And then he can get his hands in diamond technique. He can vary his technique based on situational factors and defensive leverage. Again, really strong hands, really great catching instincts, some things that he shares similarity with Mitchell Evans and a few other guys in this class. You know, a lot of really solid, reliable, capable catchers in high pressure moments. And then I think where Luke Lachey gets the edge for me, as opposed to Mitchell Evans, I do think Luke Lachey is, they're both kind of similar route runners in that they have enough fluidity, right? Lachey, like I said, doesn't have the lateral energy to, you know, expand a release package at the first and second levels. I think he's more of a guy who's going to use his explosion and bend to do that. But I do think he's a guy who has enough of a route tree. And then at the catch point, again, can box out, can dictate positioning, can make plays on the ball, strong hands, pretty good rack ability. You know, not great, but I think functional rack ability with the play strength and the leg churn that he has and the physicality. And I think Lachey is a little bit more refined as a blocker right now. I think Mitchell Evans, to me, you know, they both are really physical, high effort blockers, exactly what you want. I think both of them have immediate utility at the NFL level. It's a strength for both of them. But I do think Luke Lachey is maybe a little bit better at activating his base and sustaining power exertions, right? So I think just a little bit better at channeling that power as a blocker and staying on assignment. So, you know, again, it's splitting hairs, right? But I do think Lachey is a little bit more explosive, a little bit better as a blocker. And those things made the difference for me. He's my tight end 3, really solid player. I think the biggest question for me is, what's he going to look like coming off of this injury? Because last year, I think he caught 10 passes for 131 yards, something like that. He only played 3 games. So he was on pace for a really good year again. But we didn't get to see it, unfortunately. And he was with Eric All at Iowa as well. So really good player. That duo was fun. We didn't get to see it for the entire year. But now the question is, Luke Lachey coming back from that injury, is he going to be at 100%? Is he going to keep all of that vertical mobility and explosion that he had? Because if he does do that, he's a gliding athlete, man. He's one of those guys who can really work up the seam. He can impose his will in the red zone. He can provide appeal in a lot of different ranges. I just need to see if he's still got it. I think he will. You know, it wasn't the type of injury that would give me long-term reservations, and he's had a lot of time to recover from it. So I am bullish. I am optimistic. And, you know, plus the Iowa tight end thing, right? It doesn't actually factor into the evaluation. Like one of the first things that you learn as a scout, as much as you would love to, catch on to those patterns, right? Every single prospect is different. So don't scout the helmet, right? But he's an Iowa tight end. So naturally like, oh, I want to see what he's got to offer. I want to see what we're working with here. And I think there is a lot to work with. I think he's a great player. My tight end 3 personally got some things to watch for. He's going to be a 24-year-old rookie too. So if you're into age guardrails, that could be a factor for you if you're trying to decide between him and somebody else. But I do like the player. I think he can be a very solid tight end 2 and a very solid player with 3 down potential at the next level.
Yeah, he's right there in that same kind of bucket with, Mitchell Evans. You already mentioned him, and I'm going to have to maybe go back and take a closer look, but it was the linear explosiveness that you were mentioning. Like you mentioned, we'll see how he responds in 2024 to the injury, but he is a smooth operator for sure. And there's he's got a very good knack at the catch point for bullying people and boxing people out. Soft hands, body control is certainly there. And I would actually think that Luke Lachey probably has a little bit more to offer in the passing game than Mitchell Evans. And that's no disrespect to Mitchell Evans. I just think, Luke Lachey is a very, very good player. I just wonder, just the athleticism is really what makes me wonder about his ceiling at the next level. But I may have to go back and take a closer look at Luke Lachey if you got him all the way through.
Hey, maybe he just needed some more coffee in the games you were playing. Maybe that's what it was. No, I'm joking. And that's the thing. Everyone grades and gauges things a little bit differently. So I definitely saw the lack of lateral energy, right? I do think there are times where he is a little bit lumbering as an athlete. He's got that powerful explosiveness, right? It's not like fleet-footed explosiveness where he's accelerating because his feet are going a mile a minute, right? It's because he covers a lot of ground with each stride. And I think that's what's really clear with him. And that makes him a dangerous seam threat. But at the same time, you don't have the lateral energy of some of the higher rated guys that we're going to get to. I think we probably both have the same tight end 1. So
I think so.
We'll keep the suspense for now. But we'll get to tight end 2. Who is your tight end 2? I'll let you go first with this one. I'm really intrigued to hear who you say, because we've left a lot of names on the table that could be in this spot. I've got mine, but I want to hear yours first.
To me, it's Tyler Warren from Penn State.
Okay, I like that. I like that.
Tyler Warren. I'm falling in love with this kid. I don't have him higher ranked than Colston Loveland, which maybe we need to. I just ruined the tease.
Come on, man. No one knew.
No one, man. My bad. I'm in show business. What am I doing?
You're trying to hold it close to the vest. Colston Loveland. No one knows about him, and you just ruined it. Thanks, man. I'm kidding.
I know. Rookie amateur hour over here. Again, too much Zoa in the morning. My apologies. But look, you talk about that lateral explosiveness and agility. It's there with Tyler Warren. I love his ability to be as a rack threat, but also their STEM IQ, route running, tempo, deception, timing. There is a lot to really like about Tyler Warren as a pass catching projection to the next level. And unlike some of these other tight ends, he is listed at 257. But there was times where he took snaps out wide. Mm-hmm. He was also an H-back. He's also inline. It seems as if they prefer to kind of move him over the formation as opposed to making him just kind of that traditional inline tight end. But the movement ability, the formation versatility, the aspects that I think he can win at all 3 levels of the football field, attack the seam. I also saw him be able to kind of, at the break point, drop his hips, his weight, deceive, and then burst and create separation, in and out of his breaks, which is, it was impressive for a guy who's listed at 257. And I love his ball skills at the catch point, strong hands, body control. Check. I'm really high on Tyler Warren out of Penn State, and interested to see what he can do in 2024.
Man, I'm excited to hear that, because I haven't. He's a guy who, when I was watching Theo Johnson last year, right? Theo Johnson was the freak athlete, right? He made a lot of plays at the Senior Bowl, and everyone was really excited about his potential. But I was watching the Penn State tape, and I was definitely thinking to myself, like, I think Tyler Warren might be the more complete prospect, right? Theo Johnson was obviously very explosive. He's got good size. Again, kind of a guy who can work up the seam. He can bend through zones, but the hand consistency was a little off, the blocking, right? I thought Tyler Warren was the more complete prospect. So now moving up into this cycle, He's got enough athleticism, a strong enough athletic profile. You mentioned he's got the versatility, both in terms of usage and phase versatility, being able to provide value at different spots. He's a guy who I think was a little underappreciated last year, and I'm really excited to see how the perspective shifts and catches back up to him, because there's a lot to work with. And I think he tied Theo Johnson for the lead in touchdowns last year for Penn State. So Penn State, they got Andy Kotelnicki from Kansas as the offensive coordinator. They got Drew Aller coming into year 2 as the full-time starter. Some reason for optimism there. Some reason to kind of be looking forward to what Tyler Warren can do. That said, he's not my tight end 2. He is not my tight end 2. And to be, like I said earlier, there are a few guys that I haven't gotten valuations for at this point. It's just the nature of the game. But I will try to get a valuation on him very soon. And there's a good chance that he could sneak into my top 5. He could.
I see some Ben Sinnott, man. I see a little bit of Ben. Well, I see a little bit of Ben Sinnott.
That's just unfair. You know how to win me over. That's not fair. You're working with too much information.
Tell me if I'm crazy, but certainly watching his tape, it got me super excited.
Well, if you say Ben Sinnott, man, that's getting me excited right away, because Ben Sinnott was one of my favorite prospects last cycle. He was a dude for sure. So if he's got that versatility, that route running, I feel like you're trying to plant the seed. You're trying to be like, hey, tight end 2, make him tight end 2, Ian. Get it done.
A little bit, man. A little bit.
Okay. All right. Surreptitious. All right. I'll get to tight end 2. He is from previously the Pac-12, now to the Big Ten as well. Oregon, Terrence Ferguson, my tight end 2 for the preliminary viewings of this class. I am a big fan of what Ferguson has to offer. Graded as like a top 64 player for me. I was a fan of him coming in. I knew he was a solid player, but looking at his tape in its composite really impressed me as to just how complete of a player he is. I think he graded above a 7 in pretty much every category for me, and above an 8 in most of them. He is very well-rounded, 6'5", 255, explosive, and I think the lateral agility and the twitch and the energy in his motion is what won me over. Because Derek, we've been watching these guys. A lot of the bigger guys don't have that lateral agility and quickness, right? Like Luke Lachey, Mitchell Evans, great players, but they just don't have that level of energy and freedom in their motion. Terrence Ferguson really impressed me because it's really subtle in his game, but it definitely is there. And he can use it to offset defenders. He's explosive upfield. He can make route transitions at full speed, and he's got the hinge flexibility to really carve inside on those digs and those bends. And then at the same time, too, he can utilize that as a route runner in tandem with targeted physicality. There were reps where he would offset a DB with a Euro step and then pry pass with a swim move or a rip, get past his guy, and then make a tough catch at the catch point. I mean, I think this is a player who can legitimately independently separate. And then he's also got the toughness, the physicality. He's a great blocker. He always subscribes to the wide base, tight hands philosophy, right? So keep your base strong, attack, but then also control your opponent and keep yourself controlled, right? Those are some things that some other guys in this class have a little bit trouble with. Either they don't have the strength to do it, or they drift a little too high with their pads, things like that. Terrence Ferguson was not only physical and active, but very controlled. And I think that really stood out to me too. So great blocker, great route runner, great athlete. And then at the same time too, he can make tough catches. He can adjust. He can, he's got the hands, the whole deal. That's there with him too. So again, I don't think quite as dynamic an athlete as the guy we're going to talk about after him, because Loveland is just a different kind of deal. But Terrence Ferguson, to me, one of the more complete players that I've seen. And I was really impressed. I was pleasantly surprised by what I saw. I was expecting a top 100 guy. He definitely cemented himself as a true tight end 2 candidate and an early round pick for me. So big fan of what he's. I'm excited for you to see him, just like you're excited for me to see Tyler Warren. I think a lot of the same characteristics that you discussed with Warren, I see with Ferguson. Just a really well-rounded, versatile player who can provide impact in both phases.
Yeah, so I got some glimpses of Terrence Ferguson when I was watching the tape on Troy Franklin. So certainly it's kind of on my radar. I just haven't had a chance to take a deep dive look, which is why he didn't appear in my rankings. But you make a compelling case, and now when I do get a chance,
that's my job.
Now when I do get it, hey, I'm selling you on Tyler Warren. You're selling me on Ferguson. Certainly, all the things that you mentioned, and again, one of the things that's encouraging about Ferguson's physical profile is the size. Yeah. Another thing that I mentioned with Warren, like those, I would I really would love to see more tight ends that are north of 250 pounds because I just believe at that next level, it gives them the potential to operate regularly as an inline tight end. And you're mentioning the blocking technique of Ferguson. You like some of the consistency and some of the things that you like with his hand placement. Certainly those are things that I'm jotting down my notes when I'm going to go ahead and take a closer look at Ferguson. But yeah, tight end position, it's always a little bit interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And it's one of those things where, some guys every player is built differently, right? So, you like to think that some of these players who are 235, 240 can add more mass to their frame at the NFL level, but that's not always a guarantee, right? Some body types, they kind of max out at that point. So you like to see guys who are already at that point, and not only that, but they show the requisite mobility to, combine a little bit, right? To show like, hey, I can separate and I'm 255. Like I'm 255 and I can still explode off the line. I can still offset DBs. I can use that rapid foot movement to create space for myself. When you see guys who are able to do that, it does set them apart a little bit because you're ahead of the curve and with certainty that they have that in their toolbox. Whereas with other guys, yeah, they might have it, but they're 240. Will they have it when they're 250 or 255, right? So, the uncertainty aspect, I think, is what separates those kinds of players. Like we know right now that is something they can do. So fun player. We are at 35 minutes around, which is great because it gives us around 10 to 15 minutes, which we that might be enough to wax lyrical about Colston Loveland. Derek spoiled it. I'm sorry, everyone. But Colston Loveland is our tight end 1 at PFN. And to me, it's not really close right now. And that's not a slight for the other tight ends. That just Colston Loveland is that good. He's not quite at the Bowers level for me yet. Bowers was a blue chip prospect. Colston Loveland is a little bit below that right now, but a player who, again, I think is just a really complete prospect. I think you look at the receiving skill set in particular, it's very appealing for me. Again, explosive, energized athlete. But I think that the trademark trait with this guy is the fluidity. It's absurd. 6'5", 240, around 240, maybe a little bit over that now. And he has incredible bend and flexibility at stems. I mean, the way that he can channel and sustain acceleration with that curvilinear flexibility, right? It's really, really shocking at times, and it's so effortless. Again, with him, it's effortless. He can be employed on out routes and corner routes, and he can do multi-layered routes and use that nuanced footwork to offset and then bend around stems while sustaining acceleration. He's got the body control, that flexibility, just like it helps him run routes, also helps him make quick adjustments and kind of contort past his frame. So you'd love to see that as well. And then he's a high energy blocker too. I think there is room to add a little bit more mass to the frame and the play strength. I think that is one of the issues that I saw on tape. But even then, I do think he's a high effort blocker. He at least follows his assignments. He's got great range and space as a blocker too. So that's a fun element of his game. And that fluidity, that grading leg churn, right? Because his legs are so fast moving, there are reps where he's out in space and he can scrape through arm tackles because he's just moving. It's really tough to halt that motion when your legs are moving that fast. That leg drive is so apparent. So Colston Loveland, complete 3-down tight end. Really love the separation ability, the versatility in the receiving phase, but then has enough of a floor in the blocking department where I'm comfortable taking this guy round 1. He's got a round 1 grade for me. He can be a mismatch generator at the next level. He can be an X factor in the receiving game. And I think the arrow is still pointing up too. I think this year, obviously without the quarterback, JJ McCarthy, it's going to be a little tougher this year. But Michigan lost Cornelius Johnson, Roman Wilson. The receiving room is kind of in flux right now. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure, a lot of the onus on Loveland to be that receiving producer for Michigan. And I think he has the versatility to get it done. But tight end 1, big fan of the full skill set that he has. I think particularly in the receiving game, with the explosiveness, the agility, the twitch, the fluidity, and the bend for him at his size, that's really what takes his profile up to the next level.
You didn't leave me much to say. There is a lot to love about Loveland's game. I mean, one thing that you mentioned, though, that I'm 100% on board with, body control for a guy that size. Catches away from his frame. He makes look routine and easy. I mean, as much as we like JJ McCarthy as a potential franchise quarterback in the NFL, there were some times where McCarthy didn't make Loveland's job very easy, and Loveland kind of bailed him out with some exceptional body control for a guy that size. Excellent hands. There's just like you mentioned, the well-rounded skill set. The route running and deception, the tempo variation were things that stood out to me. And when he kind of like a Strider, like you said, I mean, it didn't feel at times like, it feels like Brock Bowers is running with his hair on fire when he has the ball in his hands. Loveland's moving too. It just doesn't look quite as twitchy as Brock Bowers, but I mean, who is? It's Bowers.
Yeah, so with Bowers, you feel the emotion and the anger, right? But you don't need to feel it with Loveland because, again, like he's cruising. You can tell, and it's tough. Not only is it tough to keep up with him and close those gaps, but again, that stubborn leg churn, I think, really allows him to have more contact balance than you would expect with his frame. And I'm glad you mentioned the tempo modulations too, because I was looking at my notes again, and I literally wrote out manipulative route runner who can use tempo modulations and head fakes to break free. I mean, he can use that. Not only does he have the athleticism and the athletic skill set to kind of buoy independent separation, but he capitalizes on that. He takes it to another level with the integration and the application of it. And that's what makes his game so exciting. Because with Brock Bowers, you could see there was a good route running floor, but I almost think Colston Loveland is a more advanced route runner already. I think the way that he utilizes those fakes and modulations is just really, kind of on the front. God,
you can make an argument that there's a little bit more nuance and detail that in Loveland's route running, because the STEM IQ, tempo modulation variation. At the break point, he understands how to attack a defender's leverage or widen him out if he is trying to get up the seam. And the ability for a guy that size to drop his weight and get out of breaks efficiently was something that certainly stood out to me. He's always in control. That's what it felt like. You mentioned smooth operator as far as his movement abilities, but it always felt like he was under control. But he's dictating the terms oftentimes against opposing defenders, because he knows where he's going and he's doing things in the midst of his stem. And one thing I also like too, I really pay attention to the route running is, do guys that size stay in their drive phase? Yeah. Because, obviously with how tall they are and how big they are, it can be tough to kind of stay disciplined and stay in that drive phase. It's even more important for tight ends and bigger players to make sure that they're staying in that drive phase so they don't lose that explosiveness, or they're losing their momentum to be able to get in and out of breaks. Like if you're standing straight up, it gives up that size advantage too at the break point. And he plays very strong at the top of his stem when the defenders are attempting to reroute him. There is a lot of route running nuance that I really enjoyed watching Loveland's tape. And, when you combine that with his athleticism and his physical profile, day one guy for me, easily.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad you took the reins there and talked about the drive phase, because I think, we see with taller tight ends a lot, like you said, the hip sync is not always there with these guys, right? And when you drift too far upright, when you're stressing vertically, that can kind of unlock a number of different issues, right? Either you kind of veer past stems a little uncontrolled and you struggle to redirect, or to compensate, you'll chop your feet a little bit too early and key in defensive backs so they can just break and close off that gap, and then they can just wrap around and deflect the ball. So, it's the way that he can play so controlled at that size. When you get bigger, when you get that big, especially, a lot of guys lose that control because they just can't sync and redirect quite as freely. But the bend, the angle freedom, the curvilinear acceleration, the flexibility, the calibration quickness with all of that, all of those things are extremely appealing with Loveland. And then to top it off, he takes it another level. And I finally remembered what I was trying to say earlier before I trailed off. But he's on the front line of innovation when it comes to the modern tight end who can be that true receiving weapon, right? We've seen it before, right? But that is a rarer type of player archetype. You don't always see that each class. I think Colston Loveland can be that special type of receiving tight end for sure. I think blocking is not elite yet, but he's good enough as a blocker where I wouldn't have any reservations putting him out there, right? So, it's a fun profile to have because you have some security with it, but then he's young too. I think he'll be a 21-year-old rookie, and he's already this advanced as a route runner. Really fun to see, really fun to think about what he might be able to do with another year of growth. So Colston Loveland is our preliminary tight end 1 at PFN. great player, could be a blue chip, could be a top 15, top 20 prospect when it's all said and done. We're almost out of here. Derek, any other names that you want to shout out? I remembered one that I forgot to mention earlier. RJ Maryland from SMU is one that I'm keeping an eye on. Mid to late day 3 right now, kind of in the fringe top 10 range. But again, I like the receiving upside for sure. I think his blocking needs a lot of work. And he's around 6'4", 233. So definitely one of those lighter kind of receiving tight ends that we were talking about earlier. But again, when you talk about explosiveness up the seam, he's got some route running potential as well. He's got strong hands over the middle. I think there is a draftable skill set there. So RJ Maryland, another one that I forgot to mention. Any other guys that you want to shout out before we get out of here?
No, not as of right now. You've got a little bit more time on the fantasy end, though. I feel like I've already got a head start on my 2025 tight end dynasty rookie rankings based on this conversation alone. I think we only had one player in common. And that was Colston Loveland, the easy one.
That's crazy, man. That's cool. I love the variability, though. It kind of speaks to how deep and how vast this tight end class is, kind of in that middle range. Like, everyone knows Loveland is probably going to be tight end 1, right? But I think after that, you have a lot of clashing skill sets, a lot of varying molds, and guys who kind of compare and contrast in different ways with each other. So it's going to be really fun to see how it plays out at that position, at every position, but tight end in particular. Very fun to watch. That is our preliminary tight end podcast for you all. We will be back. I don't know what we're going to do next week, Derek. We'll figure it out. We'll go along the lines, and we'll keep the suspense for the listeners here. But we will plan something, and we will have something for you. The season is getting closer. We are almost at the end of July here. August is coming up. It is on the front doorstep, and pretty soon, college football will be back. The NFL draft cycle will be rolling along, and we will have new weeks of content for you each and every 7-day stretch. So thank you all for listening, as you always do. Appreciate you all. Enjoy your weekends. Have a good one, and peace out. Good night.